Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the desk. Haven't seen you here for a while, and haven't seen this project for a while either. As you know, in the last about a month or so ago, we went through a move here, moved my office, moved the entire warehouse of USA Gundam Store, and in that process, this project got delayed. So picking this back up, been working on this a little bit, just to kind of try to move along more with this project, and pretty much all of the main construction is done, and what we were working on next is just basically detailing on the kit. What I'm doing is just some detail up on some of the parts. Then we're just gonna basically just have to put everything together. It is just gonna be a fixed posed model at the end of the day, and it's just gonna be hand painted. So for now, I just want to basically take each section and do whatever I'm gonna do detail-wise on that section until all the sections are done, then we can start putting stuff together. So that's what I'm working on. Here, let's start with the torso. Let me show you a little bit about what I've done here on this part. Not necessarily too much other than just removing the seam line here on the side. I added a layer, 1mm of plot plate thickness here on the bottom just to make the torso a little bit thicker here vertically. Thought about adding a layer on top as well, but I think I'm just gonna stick with that. You can see some panel lining here filled in. That's basically just because I just went over this with a 0.15 scriber, just like this here, just to scribe out those panel lines, just to make the panel lines a little bit more pronounced. And then the only other thing that I've really added on here so far is just these couple of piping bits, and that's just gonna make our kind of entry point for the piping parts that wrap around to the backpack, since we're not using what was originally included with the kit. So what I'm gonna use for that, we'll come back to later, because that's gonna be like one of the things that I'm gonna add last, just because otherwise it's just kind of going to be in the way. But ultimately that's going to connect around to the backpack. So once this is attached onto here, we have basically this plugs into here. There's not really any specific spot for that to plug into. With the original kit, you just kind of had to glue it into place. And so that's what we're gonna have to do, a little bit of modification on that. We'll add a hole, basically just make like what we have here, a hole with like a ring around it, and we'll do that here on the backpack as well, and then we'll just connect it by some pieces here. While we're on the topic, this is just the backpack part here. The only other like major modification that I still have left to make is for the underarm like grenade launcher cannon bits that with this kit are only able to point forward, but I want to actually have them to just be kind of slung and in the back, not in use. So we'll come back to that. As for the head here, one thing that I've done is once again just removing the seam lines. The inside part had a seam line kind of going across, and then the outside part had a seam line right down the middle. So remove the seam line on the inside part first, then added the mono eye right there, so it has no molded detail for the mono eye. So what I did was drill a hole, stick a piece of plastic in there, sand it down to make a mono eye, which is just going to be, now it's just a molded detail. I did kind of make it a little bit offset, just so that it wouldn't be directly centered for the pose later. And then just removing the seam line here on the outer shell of the head. On the center part right here, kind of on the snoot, I still need to sand this down a little bit, refine this detail slightly, but basically the seam line down in the middle of there was kind of difficult to get rid of. Now, one way that I just made my life a little bit easier was just to actually go over that with a little bit of plot plate. So just kind of took, in this case, a 2mm scriber chisel, and just kind of chiseled that out. Also kind of chiseled it up slightly right there. Chiseled that section out, cut a piece of plot plate to fit into there, and now it's gonna be just another detail. Also had to chisel out up here in the camera section a bit too, just because there was a difficult to remove seam line there, but chiseled that out and that's fine. And also, of course, added the rabbit ears here on the top. That's what I'm going for the option. There is an option of just the single antenna or the rabbit ears. I always thought that the rabbit ears is kind of more interesting looking option there for that. Those parts did not fit on there properly, and all they are is just they're just glued on, and they didn't really fit. So I did have to kind of cut those a little bit to get them to fit on there perfectly. And I can still tell, like I can see they're not perfectly straight and in line, but pretty close enough that once the kit is all together, it's gonna look pretty cool. So you can see the head's just gonna be glued onto here just like that, and I think it's gonna look pretty good. Okay, so other bits that are done so far for the front and back skirt here, what I've done is just drilled a small hole 1mm hole and then stuck a piece of 1mm plastic rod into there, and then also chiseled a small little line just directly above that. Later, once this has some more time to cure, the glue there, because it's pretty fresh, I'm gonna cut that down so that little bit is not sticking out quite so much, and then just kind of sand that down a little bit, so just to make a little bit of an added detail. And the same thing here on the front skirts as well. And one thing that I'm trying to keep in mind for like the detailing on this, I'm trying to not make it look too modern. So in terms of like the style of the detailing on it, I'm trying to go for something that was kind of a common style of the time for a model like this. And so this is a good example. Here was what I'm doing on the side skirt, basically just making kind of these two cutout details here on the side skirt. And how I'm achieving that here is just by using tape to just kind of measure out the locations. I've gone ahead and just use a sharp pointed tool to kind of mark these 4 corners here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'll take a 1mm drill, here we go, just like this. There you go, and that'll give us our 4 holes. And then basically what we're going to do is then, using a chisel a line between those 2 holes, and that will give us a look like this. So I'm gonna switch to some Dymo tape, and since those holes are 1mm, I'm gonna want to use a 1mm wide chisel, which will basically match the width of those holes. I'm just gonna scribe a straight line in between them until we're all the way through the plastic, and that'll make our slots here. Yeah, all right, and then once you got those kind of scribed through, you can then go ahead and use a knife to kind of clean up the edges a little bit in here carefully and get it a little bit more nice looking. We'll also sand it here a little bit. And there we go, there's our 2 side pieces. Now I have marked these left and right so as not to get them confused easily. And you'll also notice I added a little block of plot plate in right here. That is going to be how we're going to mount these onto the side. So I've drilled a little hole right there. So originally this part just kind of like fit right on top of there, on top of this little like edge around the hip section right here, as you can see. Also just re-scribed out the line here on the front of there. But yeah, so just gonna drill a little hole in here and then a little hole right there. We can just basically pin this right here to the side. I can also then adjust like the angle, either front or back, side to side as I need. Gonna wait until the thigh part's actually attached onto here though first, so not gonna attach on the side skirts quite yet. The back skirts though are pretty much done. I went ahead and also just kind of finished off those little details there. These can be just glued in place, and so again there's like a little lip right here that those fit on. The position of the front and back skirt is not going to make a difference as far as being in the way of our legs or any other parts of the kit, so these can go ahead and be glued into place here. And so then we got those in place. I did also add a little plot plate riser like right underneath that front skirt part and then up underneath the back skirt part there as well, just to make sure that those are kind of like in the right position. I wanted it to be like kind of slightly elevated, not laying flat against this part and this one as well, just to kind of give it a little bit more, just to kind of grab onto there. So the rod here sticking out the top, obviously going to be the piece which is going to connect. We have our middle piece, like middle section here, that we cut out. That can be slid onto there, and then the torso piece is going to connect onto there like that. But here, I'm using that rod, I can also then adjust the angle. It doesn't have to be straight like that. I could just bend the rod, and then we could basically make like kind of a torso bend, like an ab crunch there, as it were, right? So that's what I'm going to do, and then actually, as I talked about in the past videos, what we're going to use kind of between the joints is some putty to simulate the sort of Gundam Thunderbolt style, or it's not only that, but you see it in particularly notably in Gundam Thunderbolt, but the style of some like cloth covering on the joints, and I want to have that around the midsection of the joints too. So even though there's going to be a gap between these sections, we're going to then fill that gap with some putty. The problem is that it's kind of a lot of empty space to just fill with putty if we're trying to just kind of like jam it in there. So one thing that I'm also going to do is once we bend this here slightly, just gonna grab some pliers here so that we can give this just a little bit of a bend here for us. Just something, maybe a little bit more. Something like that I think could be good. Let's try it out here and see how that looks. Yeah, and you can tell that's probably maybe a little bit too extreme of a bend there, depending on the pose we're going for, but we're not going in for anything like quite that extreme, so I'm going to bend this back a little bit, glue it in place. And anyway, the other thing that I'm going to do, just to make it so that we don't have to shove so much putty into the gaps, is actually just take some plastic rod, and just kind of glue some plastic rod around on the inside of this middle piece, like a couple of pieces here and there, just to kind of fill the space with just some plastic before we put the putty in, just so it's less putty that we have to use in between there. And you'll see what I mean here in just a second. So just gonna like cut this up into some small pieces, and this is just a piece of a runner. Here I just cut off a little bit section of a runner. I'm just gonna chop up, basically just use for pieces here. Okay, so those are now in place, and now you can see kind of a little bit more exactly like what I was talking about. Just took some plastic rods, glued to the inside of that part just to kind of give us some filling there, as it were, and kind of got this a little bit bent and shaped into the right position just to give us a tiny little bit of ab crunch and a little bit of space there. I'm having some real trouble saying that word today. And then once we put the top section on here, it's going to be pretty tight in the front section, but as you can see, we now have a little bit more kind of space out there in the back to give us a little bit more kind of that dynamic pose. And so I'm going to glue this, and then we'll go ahead and start filling this in with some putty, and that'll give us a good example of kind of what is going to be going on for the limbs as well. We can actually probably go ahead and put the head on there as well. There's one more thing that I do want to do here on the torso. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and take this back off for a second. And again, in keeping in line with what was some of the detailing trends of the time, one thing I want to add is a little bar detail here. So I got some brass wire. This is a 0.8 millimeter brass wire I'm going to use here. Basically going to drill 2 holes right here and here in this little detail section, and then bend a little piece of brass, that piece of brass rod, to make a little kind of handlebar sort of looking bit right here. Let's go ahead and do that. We're gonna first mark our 2 spots where we're gonna drill. So with a 0.8 millimeter pin vise, drill a couple holes in there. I've gone ahead and just used some needle nose pliers to bend this rod here to shape, and then got these handy wave wire cutters here. Just gonna clip this off just like that, and you can stick it in there, and I'm gonna stick a little bit of super glue on the back side to make sure that that doesn't go anywhere. It should just fit into place here, and there we go. Now we got that in place, and now we can go ahead and glue the torso together and start adding some putty in there. And so just kind of working on getting the putty worked into place here. And this tool is just a kind of paint stirrer, but it doubles as kind of like a tool to just press the putty, and then also in the process of doing that, it kind of makes the texture that we want to look like sort of crumpled cloth in between the joints. So it's kind of doing both things at once here. So I'm just kind of getting this worked around. As you can see, I also went ahead and glued the head on here. I'm going to add a little bit of putty around here in the neck as well, but kind of basically done with this section here. So it shouldn't cover over the edges of the armor, but fill the gaps in between so that it still looks like the armor. If it's over the top of the armor, then that means it's like covering the armor, but what we want it to look like is just covering the space in between the armor. Okay, then last major modification we're going to have to make here is going to be on the backpack, having the cannons. Here are the grenade launchers, whatever. The part that comes with the kit originally is fixed in position to only have them in a forward pose like that. Now, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have them slung on the back here, and if I remember correctly, the Master Grade has them sort of in the position where they're kind of like back and at an angle like that. Something like that would be cool. I was going through my spare parts and found some leftover bits from some Iron Blooded Orphans HG kits that we can use to make some new subarms here for the rifles. So basically, This part here has a peg at the top, one going off to the side and one going off to the front, and these are fortunately asymmetrical like that, which is perfect for us. I'm gonna have to cut off this peg here on the front, and this other like joint part is like a functioning joint, so I can change the angle of this up and down and rotate it left to right. But again, it is going to be ultimately just glued in place, so it doesn't really matter, but it needs to look like a joint, so that's good. And also this is going to then fit into this gap right here. Now I could make this gap wider or thinner kind of as needed, but as it is, this part kind of like already almost fits in there as it is, so I just need to kind of trim down this part a little bit and that'll fit into there. And then this will hold the weapon here on the back. I also had to drill out this hole. This hole on the original kit, it's like slightly smaller than 3mm, so just drilled that out to a proper 3mm, so it'll fit here nicely with our part. So this sub-arm part will just plug onto there like that, and then again, once this is trimmed down a little bit, this will fit into here and then hold that on the backpack like that. Now it can be just straight up and down like that. I can angle it a little bit, but obviously with the two of these being here, I can't angle them too much or they'll be bumping into each other. There's also the hole here for the handle. Now the handle should be kind of like locked in there before removing the seam line, but I went ahead and just removed the seams and left the handle out because I knew I was gonna have to modify it in some way. So this one also is gonna be kind of getting in the way if there's two of these right next to each other like that and the handle's facing in. So what I'm gonna do is actually just cut this part here. So cut this hole a little bit further back right there so that the handle can basically be inserted in at an upward angle like that. So once that's kind of in and folded up like so, then the two of these can be kind of like facing each other without clashing into each other too much. Hopefully that's the idea. So pretty simple for that. And then one other thing that I think I would like to do with this backpack is just add some more like kind of vent detail to it. So maybe either like in this lower center kind of blank section right there, and or here on this big flat top part where there's just kind of nothing going on. And so I was thinking about doing kind of similarly like I did before, like I demonstrated for you guys in my video talking about bread clips, how to make like a radiator effect just by like kind of stacking bread clips. You can also just do it with any kind of plot plate, it doesn't have to be bread clips, but works very easily with that to make a kind of like radiator detail either here and or up here. So something like that, I think. And then if you're wondering about these holes right here, that was just an actual molded detail of these like little dots there. I just went ahead and took a 0.5mm pin vise drill bit and just drilled out those holes just to make that detail more prominent. And that's just something that I'm just going to be doing all over the kit, re-scribing out the panel lines, also scribing along the edges of parts just to help like the definition of all the existing details in there as well. And on the note of the grenade launchers, whatever, here, the other thing that I want to do is actually extend the barrel. And what I'm going to do is actually just take, this is a piece of 4mm diameter plastic rod, which is the right fit to fit inside the barrel here. So that'll fit directly into there. Just basically cut 4 sections to just basically extend this out a little bit with a couple of pieces of rod, which is a great opportunity for me to use my wave tube cutter here, plastic tube cutter, a tool that I don't really get the opportunity to use too often. Cut 4 of these, just pop them into there like that. And then once they're in, if the length doesn't match, you know, exactly, I can kind of just like file it down so that they'll match in length, and also can just kind of bevel the edge, the actual barrel there a little bit, just to make that look a little bit nicer.